At BeBalanced, we tend to get a lot more questions lately about PCOS, which stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is a condition that I personally believe, after studying hormones for years, that's going to become, unfortunately, more and more prevalent. A lot of times you can see it with young girls. As soon as they go through the puberty gates, they start to develop some of the characteristics of PCOS. And then a lot of times women, even as they're older, like usually before pregnancy, but sometimes it could rear its head after pregnancy. So what I'd like to do is start off giving a real basics on hormones, which is the BeBalanced philosophy, and then I want to talk about how a PCOS girl would look hormonally compared to a regular woman with PMS and issues like that. So let's start with our basic philosophy. With BeBalanced, we talk about the stress in our modern society causing our cortisol levels to go up high. Cortisol is a stress hormone that buffers us from stress. So when we're under constant stress, even young girls, they're in cheerleading and they're trying to get good grades and they're trying to get into college, to women that have children and are working, it seems like all women are under excess stress. So this excess stress causes cortisol to be high all the time. The body can't keep up with the demand for cortisol, so what does it do? It steals a hormone called progesterone and it converts it to cortisol. That leaves a woman, we'll just premenopausally, estrogen dominant. Now why is that bad? Because progesterone is your best friend. You don't want to be low in progesterone. It's important for a PCOS girl. It's important for a regular girl. It is relaxing. It is calming. It steadies blood sugar. It helps with weight loss. It helps with sleep. It helps with prevent female-related conditions such as PCOS, but also things like endometriosis, fibroids, even female cancers. So progesterone is our best friend. We don't want to be low on progesterone. We don't want to be stolen because of stress. Now, what happens is when we're low on progesterone, that other hormone that we talk about all the time is estrogen. Estrogen is a great hormone, causes us to develop our secondary sex characteristics, causes us to ovulate, which is important, right? And many other things. But estrogen, when left out of control, is the opposite of progesterone. It causes you to hold on to fat, hold on to fluid. Now you're more irritable, you're not calm anymore, you can't sleep. Overstimulates tissue, could cause female cancers, could cause endometriosis, things like that. So in our society, most young girls that you see on the street, 95% of them are estrogen dominant, premenopausally. They have more estrogen, normal levels, lower progesterone because of stress. Now, we won't go into it now a lot, but after menopause, that gets worse. That's why women get worse after menopause. The progesterone drops further, their estrogen drops down. For the purpose of this video, let's focus on this. So the average girl with PMS, okay, has slightly lower progesterone, normal estrogen, she's younger, high cortisol because of stress. Now, let's talk about a PCOS. So a girl with PCOS, it gets a little bit more complicated. So stress goes up, cortisol goes up, okay? But we got two paths we're going here. People don't realize when cortisol is high all the time, the stress hormone, the body releases insulin. That's because blood sugar comes out for us to fight or flight, right? For the cortisol, the stress hormone, and insulin comes out because insulin has to help get the sugar in the cells. So blood sugar, really could say blood sugar goes up, but insulin goes up. When insulin goes up, you become insulin resistant, there's weight gain, and it's mostly around the midsection. Okay, so a polycystic ovarian, a girl that has polycystic ovarian syndrome, she's going to have, even if she's younger, a little more of a tire, a little bit more weight gain around the waist. Very rare cases, there's an insulin resistance and they're too skinny, but it's usually there's extra weight around the waist, which is very discouraging. Then, whenever insulin is spiked, in general, for women, it raises testosterone. Medical fact, just what it is, okay? So when the testosterone goes up, she could get more oily skin, more acne, especially the younger she is, the worse. Excess facial and body hair called hirsutism, which can be very embarrassing. You can even get laser and try to get it off, but if the hormones are wrong, the hair is going to keep coming back. And then there's actually be thinning on the hair on the head, especially around this part where male pattern baldness, the excess testosterone hits those receptor sites, causing the hair to thin, hits the receptor sites here on the body and causes you to have hair that you don't want to, and then obviously acne. So that's the direction there. But what's happening with the female hormones? We already said a woman, regular woman's got low progesterone due to stress. Well, guess what? With a PCOS girl, her progesterone goes so low that her estrogen, I call it down-regulates. She has plenty in her tissues, but the body pulls it back. So now in her bloodstream, she's low in estrogen. So now what's going on here? This woman is low in two female hormones, and she's higher in a male hormone. But what happens there, when estrogen goes too low, she doesn't ovulate. Now you say, well, what's the big deal? Well, if she's not trying to get pregnant, you say it's no big deal. But when she doesn't ovulate, that lowers her progesterone even more, because when you pop an egg out, that's where the body produces progesterone. So the estrogen's needed to ovulate. She's got low estrogen, right? But then, because she doesn't ovulate, she doesn't pop an egg, and that causes her progesterone to get lower, and she has irregular or no cycles, and it gets worse and worse. So this is what's happening. She's not only low in progesterone and high in cortisol, she's also lower in estrogen and higher in testosterone and insulin. Now, what does the medical community do for women with PCOS? I've seen it all the time. This is what happens. They get put on metformin or that type of a drug which lowers blood sugar. It's supposed to help them lose weight. Never seen it. It's a stimulatory type of drug. They don't lose the weight because of it. I've seen women on 2,000 to 1,000 to 500. That's typical just because she has insulin resistance. Well, guess what? It doesn't work. I've seen it. The next thing, throw them on the birth control pill, regulate some of this stuff. They're not ovulating at that point, and they just get thrown on the birth control to control some of the symptoms, and it does help temporarily. And they leave the girls on those types of drugs until they're 28, 30, 32, and they want to have babies. Then they have to pull them off those, and then they usually put them on something like Clomid that stimulates them to ovulate. To hopefully, it's a very strong drug to stimulate them to ovulate so they can possibly, have a period and get pregnant. Okay, so what does BeBalanced do? Let me get my chart again. I'm going to show you, and this is going to balance out everything. With BeBalanced, we're going to lower stress. It's going to lower cortisol. We're going to bring up bring up progesterone. When you bring up progesterone, estrogen levels, I'm going to put a PCOS girl over here with the postmenopausal. She's not, because she's low in both. When you bring up progesterone, estrogen will regulate it on its own. Now, what has happened here? When we work with PCOS girls on our diet program, we lower their sugars because we lower their insulin and we lower their intake of sugar. So if we lower their intake of sugar and do a certain type of diet, insulin's going to go down. Well, what happens when insulin goes down? Testosterone automatically goes down. So we can just control blood sugar, not through metformin, but through a diet and relaxation therapy. We're going to get her insulin down, get her off the metformin drugs, get her testosterone down. What does that do? The hair on the head starts to thicken up. You can then treat hairs. If you treat hairs with laser or waxing or whatever, they'll respond and they'll start going in the other direction. And then acne starts to fade away. Then, when we get the cortisol levels down, the progesterone levels come up, estrogen levels starts to come up, she can then start to ovulate. There's enough estrogen to now stimulate that egg to pop out, and then that produces more progesterone, and then the estrogen-progesterone loop starts to work out. So it's amazing. We're just balancing hormones naturally, which is what BeBalanced does. We call natural hormone balancing. We always work with insulin and cortisol, and we always work with estrogen and progesterone. We don't even change our formula for a client with PCOS. It just has a regulatory effect. We naturally lower insulin and sugar. We're going to naturally get effect with lowering testosterone. We naturally raise progesterone. We're going to naturally raise estrogen. The body will do it on its own, and the woman begins to ovulate again. So we just want you to know, if you're dealing with symptoms of PCOS and you have a degree, see, a lot of women have degrees of PCOS, or you're full-blown PCOS. When we get the body back in balance, no strong drugs are needed, no birth control pills are needed, and you can get back to a normal cycle and ovulation. If you have any other questions, contact us through the website. Thanks for watching.